All right, welcome everybody to another session on Localized. Today we have with us Priya Patil. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a
Correct.
pleasure to have you here with us today. Today we're talking about Priya's transition from a history major to a software engineer. We oftentimes come across people on the Localized platform who struggle with this, who might not have a technical background but want to transition into tech. So it's wonderful to have you here as an example of somebody that has successfully been able to do that. Priya is a senior software engineer at 8th Light. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in history and now works as, like I said before, a senior software engineer. So, welcome to Localized. We're excited to have you here and we're excited to learn about your story.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to share the story. It's a long story, but hopefully it's a good one.
So you said it's a long, so I think maybe give us some background. I mean, why is it that what drove you to history and what drove you to make that transition to software engineering? And was there anything in between? Like, how
Yeah,
did
sure.
you get here?
There definitely was stuff in between. So I was always interested in history. It was one of my favorite subjects at school. I thought it was really interesting and it was interesting how it linked to present day. I felt like it explained so much. And so when it came to studying, I thought studying at university, I thought it kind of made sense that everyone told me to follow my interests.
Yeah,
You know, in
yeah,
England, everyone said, yeah, you don't have to do a degree specifically related to what you would do later. I got told that a lot in high school.
okay,
So history was something I was very interested in. I went to SOAS, University of London, and studied history with a minor in economics. I majored in history and
okay,
then a minor in economics.
good,
And yeah, I did well. I graduated, and then the recession hit, and I was thinking, okay, what am I gonna apply to? I then at that time was thinking, okay, law seems like a sensible decision. A lot of my friends were also applying for legal training and getting into law school and then becoming lawyers. My parents were very happy with that decision as Asian parents, and they were thinking, yes, law makes sense to them.
okay,
Um, and so I started applying for training contracts, which in the UK is something you can do if you've studied a different topic. You can become a lawyer through kind of being sponsored by a law firm,
mm,
basically.
mm,
And it was very difficult to get a training contract, so I kept applying. And in the meantime, I got a job at a hedge fund with the operations team, so like helping them with legal regulations and some of their operations as well. And so I started working there, and like the day to day, I was not a fan of the nature of the work.
okay,
And so in my spare time, I kind of learned a little bit more about, everyone was talking about coding at that time, but it was quite a new thing. Like
okay,
people were aware of it, but they didn't fully understand it. Kind of like AI is now, I'd say.
yeah,
There's
okay,
like that sense that it's going to be big, but yeah, very
okay.
few people really knew what they were doing maybe at that time. And now it feels like everyone's more aware of coding and what it means and how to apply and where to learn. But at that time, it was a bit like a little bit more under the radar. And so I kind of read around a lot and looked up meetups in online and came across one that was trying to make tech a more diverse space and kind of make it more inclusive. So was targeted at getting more women into tech.
Okay.
And I went along to the workshop. I really enjoyed it. It was very basic, so it like kind of just helped you spin up a website in a day almost. So it did most of the work for you. But I was like, oh, I can do this. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, that's half the battle, I think, is like you feel empowered that you can do something. And then I just kept going to these workshops. It's through a company called Code Bar. It's a charity.
Okay.
I think I've shared the link
Yeah.
in
And we'll be sharing that with everybody
yeah.
that's here today. Yes.
Um, And yeah, that was really great. And I just kind of kept going along. It's the idea is that somebody like myself, now a senior engineer, can go along and coach for 2 hours after work, somebody who's interested in learning.
Oh, okay, that's nice.
Yeah, and it's in different offices.
in the
Yeah,
skill, and then you're kind of giving back now by
yeah,
helping other people. Okay,
exactly.
cool.
Yeah,
That's
that's
cool.
the idea. And different offices sponsor
Yeah.
the event.
Okay. Okay.
And it's across the world now, lots of different locations all over different countries.
Very
But
cool. And
that's
this is like, you don't have to be in the country where is it? It's not country based.
we did have virtual workshops as well during COVID, so I think that's still a thing, but it's in like hundreds of different countries now. It
Yeah.
started in London,
Yeah. Yeah.
but now it's across the globe. Like I can't keep track of where they are now because the model is very easy to replicate. If you're interested in learning, the
Yeah.
resources are online and you ask a company to host for a few hours in the evening, which is usually low effort on the company's part.
Cool. And I think that actually ties in very nicely, and we'll get to that in our discussion. The idea of the skill set that you would need to be able to transition into a
Right.
technical role from a non-technical background, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And on the transitioning front, I mean, the idea of transitioning from non-technical role to a technical role can be a daunting idea, right? It's a difficult step, or it's a difficult
Mhm.
decision to take.
Yes.
So could you give us examples of some of the challenges that you faced in that process and how you overcame them?
Yeah, sure. So I think I found through that a very supportive community,
Okay.
and I I found that the people who are coming to volunteer are the people at the company that I'm working for now. So some of the volunteers were hiring for apprenticeship to teach me.
Okay.
Um, and it was daunting because it was initially an unpaid role, which very short period of time, but it was.
Mhm.
And then it was like just learning for a year, hoping at the end of that time you'd be able to get a job out of it. So that was very daunting. And I remember I was the most junior person by far in that company because everyone else was quite senior and I was an apprentice, and I hadn't coded before. And I remember at one point them speaking to each other and thinking, wow, this is like they're speaking a foreign language because the terminology they used, I had no clue. And then I did speak to one of them one day and being like, I'm a bit worried that I'm not catching up fast enough. And they said, do you know more today than you knew yesterday? And I said, yes. And they were like, that's your main
Okay.
concern. As long
Okay.
as that's true, don't worry too much about the
The
other stuff.
the rate, the speed.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be honest, it was because I guess it's hard to measure in tech. There's no official curriculum.
Hmm.
It's just that
Yeah.
what makes it so accessible is also what makes it quite difficult to know where you are or where you're at.
So,
Uh,
let me ask you actually, because in our field we see a lot of discussion about pay and unpaid jobs.
mm, yeah.
People typically frown upon that, right?
Mhm. Yes.
But if somebody in our audience was offered an opportunity in a tech company that was
Mhm.
unpaid,
Yes.
would you
Would
advise them to take it?
I think I would look at, first of all, it completely depends on your financial situation. So
Of
I wouldn't want to
course.
tell somebody about that. But given that, I would say look at it as a very short duration, like make sure it's very time boxed. So
Yeah,
don't, I would almost say like don't go over a month. And that's a very short amount of time. But if it's every day you're learning something,
yeah,
a month is like quite a long time.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I would say don't go over that because at that point, and maybe also the nature of the work you're doing. So if you're doing work that is bringing the company money,
yeah. That
then then you should be yeah, remunerated for it. But if you are just learning, so I was not bringing any money into the company, I was just learning,
yeah.
then that point, I think it's good. It's
And, and
okay.
I, and I guess that moves me to my next question, which is around how do you build knowledge, right? How do you build experience or relevance in an industry that you don't have any experience on, right? So maybe
Yeah.
that's an example.
Yeah.
Uh, Taking a job for a month time bound. I love
Yeah.
that piece of advice. Do you have other idea? Like how else could somebody go about gaining?
Yeah. One thing is just like start building stuff.
Okay.
It seems daunting, but putting just like an HTML page, which is basically a non-interactive page on a website,
Yeah.
is something you can do, and you'll learn a lot just from something as simple as that. And
Huh.
then you can like build upon that knowledge. So like in coding, it's one of the things that you can do, which is harder in other jobs, but you can show what you can do very clearly.
Okay. Yeah. Like a portfolio, building a
Yeah,
portfolio of
yeah, it's very
software.
visible. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
some of it's visible, some isn't, but there's an aspect that you can just
In
show.
showcase, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so you don't need, because there are so many resources, you will get stuck doing that.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of communities like Discord channels or groups or meetups that you can go to where people will help you get unstuck, I think.
I guess like so early on when you're moving into tech,
Mhm.
tech is a big field, right?
Yeah,
You can be a front, and I'm not a techie, but I know you can be a front-end engineer, you can be a back-end engineer, you can be quality, sure, QA engineer, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other stuff.
there is, yeah.
How do I pick?
I
How
think,
yeah,
yeah, it depends. I suppose if you want to start, I'd say by that building, you're almost doing all of those things at the beginning.
okay,
Oh, I wouldn't choose at the beginning. I'd say start by doing something very small scale that you are doing all of those. So you know what they are. Like if I decide to go away and build a little website, I would be doing all of those things, like at a very simple level.
okay,
But I
yeah.
would be
So it's
writing the backend code, front end code, deploying it, checking if this clicking works. So that in that sense, I'm doing all those roles just at like a minuscule scale.
yeah,
Then you can see, this is quite fun. And then like as time goes on, you'll probably be more interested in one aspect of it or another, but until you know what they are, it's hard to gauge.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned resources. You mentioned in your experience a community that has helped you, which brings me to the idea of networking, right? And
Right.
I think how important has networking been for you in this pivot?
Yeah.
And do you have any advice? I mean, we can, like advice that you can share with
Yeah.
our audience on what they can do to network.
Yeah, sure. I guess I would never have thought of it as networking, but I suppose attending those workshops basically was that. It
Yeah.
wasn't officially networking, but I built my network through attending those workshops. I guess as somebody who's more technical and less sales driven, I'm not somebody who's going to like network specifically to gauge that aspect of the business.
Uh-huh.
But going through those workshops, I was meeting other people at those levels already, and I was meeting other developers and
Yeah.
building a network that way,
Yeah.
which was really good and give me like a huge range of people throughout the industry. So that was really good. And now there's a lot of conferences that I go to through our company, and that's always good. It's just interesting to see what people are up to more than anything else. Like again, I'm technical, so I'm not sales driven necessarily. Like that's not my main focus,
Right.
but
Yes.
having those interesting conversations is quite fun. And yeah, I quite like that aspect of it.
So you mentioned conferences as a tool, a community of within the learning environment. Like as you're progressing in your skill set, having a community around you, I guess also helps you to achieve
Yeah.
milestone, right? That helps you like in terms of your personal.
Yeah. And following your interests maybe, as opposed to going to them with a specific aim of networking,
Yeah.
going with your interests, and then networking is a secondary thing that will come out of following your interests.
Nice. Okay. I like that idea. Like not thinking of it as a primary objective, but more that it comes with your learning journey, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say that's helpful.
Okay. So I guess on the idea of a learning curve, right? So a learning journey, you mentioned that if you're learning a little bit every day, that matters. But sometimes if you're transitioning and you're maybe later in your career, time is an issue. Like how much time is it going like how much time is it going to take me to actually be able to
Yeah,
learn? Like,
that's true. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, did you face that in your journey? And if so, how did you overcome over?
Yeah. Again, through the apprenticeship at my company, Eighth Light, they
Okay.
had these
Yeah.
questions for all the types of things we would ask. So we
Nice.
had, we basically simulated being at a client and delivering work.
Okay.
And so sometimes what the way we work is that you say, "Oh, I'm going to build this for you," and then you say how much time you think it will take you to build it
Okay.
to the client, and then you work towards that. And so if you're stuck on something, you don't know when to ask for help because if you're learning,
Hmm.
you don't know whether you should tackle the problem
Yes.
through yourself or you should ask
Or
somebody who'll tell
yeah.
you immediately.
Yeah.
And so at that point, they told us like if you're stuck on it for a few hours, ask somebody.
Okay.
And then in that scale, I guess you could maybe initially it will always take you longer. That's the thing. So it should be like a curve like this, I suppose. Like it will get faster the more you do. So the beginning you'll be slow, and then you'll get faster at it.
Okay. So I guess I mean I'm trying to contextualize that for something
Yeah,
that can be so,
yeah,
so in a sense planning for right because ultimately it's about the plan, right?
yeah,
If time frame is an issue for you,
yeah,
a matter of I'm planning for this to take me 6 months,
yeah,
and I know that earlier on there's going to be more time allocated to problem solving, and
yeah,
later on it's
yeah.
maybe observe or like learning
Mm.
fast, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah. I guess you said 6 months, 3 months to 6 months. A lot of boot camps, for example, that you
Yeah,
can attend here
yeah,
are about 3 months to 6 months. I think and that's like full-time learning with support. So that's kind
yeah.
of with the 3 month ones. They're usually like 12 weeks, I think. So um they they estimate that time. And then obviously you're not going to know everything there is to know in that time, but that's like a good scaffolding that you'll have in place. I think it should be about that long, I say.
I get when I talk about often when I discuss technical jobs and technical skills, there's the non-technical side of it, right? The
Mhm.
soft skills that are involved. And we all know that they're the typical ones, right? You need to have good communication, you need to be a good team player, right? There's a few of them. I think for somebody transitioning from a non-technical role to a technical role, as somebody that's been through that, have there been skill sets that your transferable skill sets that you had from your humanities background that sets you apart in the technical or amongst your peers in the technical
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, I think if you come from a more humanities or non-technical role,
Yeah.
you your communication skills, you're aware already of like what level to communicate into somebody who's not technical. So how to communicate technical concepts in a non-technical way. So what's the right level? Yeah, that's a really useful skill that I
Okay.
think if you've studied computer science your whole life, it's something you can also forget. So like the more technical you get, you have to remember how to do that.
Right.
And that's incredibly useful because you will be working with people who are not technical
Yeah,
almost 100%. So you need to be able to do that. And
that's
it's
very
definitely a
interesting.
skill. Yeah. Very important skill.
I want to ask, I don't want to put you on the spotlight, but is there another one that you can share with us?
Another, what, sorry?
Another transferable skill that
Oh,
you,
another transferable skill. Yeah, I guess thinking logically and critically. So,
okay,
um, being able to, yeah, distill ideas down into like concrete examples or, yeah, lots of like in history, for example, you do a lot of reading and then you distill it down into concrete things. That's also very useful. And yeah, critical thinking, like
nice.
definitely. That's true of a lot of subjects as well.
Yes,
But yeah,
yes.
it definitely helps those things.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to talk to you a little bit. Within your journey, you had to go through, we mentioned a learning journey, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have access to paid resources.
Mhm.
Have you come or like, do you have any experience on good free resources that have been useful to you? I mean, you've obviously mentioned a few organizations already,
Yeah.
but has there something else that you've depended on that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I quite like, I was looking at this recently, Free Code Camp. I think that's a link that can be shared as well.
Yep.
Um, that's a really good one. It's a very it's an open community and they have a lot of different tutorials and videos and things like this. That's really, really good. I think that's a good resource. Honestly, a lot of it because there's so much out there.
Yeah.
It's like if you decide you want to build something, so something very simple, if you search for that, there will be a tutorial on it. So a lot of times I look up a concept or idea and then just say tutorial, and there's like a step-by-step walkthrough
Okay.
of how, so say Python, for
Yeah.
example, there's Python, I think IO, there's like Re Real Python, which is a good resource for Python specific coding. So I would just like look that up with a tutorial at the end, and then it will surely have something that will kind of guide you through.
You know, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about how there's so much continuous learning happening here, right?
Yeah,
You're
definitely.
always learning something new,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so if you're a non-technical person coming into a technical role, you have to learn it. But
yeah,
as a technical person, you're constantly learning new things as well, right?
yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give is
Yeah.
like get better at learning fast. Like just keep
Yeah.
that learning habit up because tech moves so fast that if you don't, your skills will be outdated quite quickly. And
Mhm.
that sounds daunting because that feels like it never ends, but you don't have to do a huge amount every day, but just like a little bit every day already puts you quite far ahead. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, just keep learning. That's actually one of the things that they taught us at my company when I did the apprenticeship is like that habit of learning. Our company prioritizes that as well because I think they're aware for
Yeah.
us keep that
That
skill
you need to
very,
keep
very
updated.
important. Yeah, definitely. Continuous
I mean,
learning.
I want to ask you a little bit about that actually, because I think that in itself is probably a skill set, right?
Mhm.
The
Yeah,
ability to continuously learn. How,
yeah,
how do you how do you approach that,
yeah.
right?
Um,
Like, yeah,
I would at our company we try to have dedicated time for that. So like
okay,
uh, ring fence that time as well. Like
yeah,
make sure you keep it for that and then try and have something tangible either you can share or show for it. So like a blog post or
hmm,
something you've built or explaining it to somebody so that it's not just theoretical because otherwise you can read about something for like a week and not really be able to do anything practical at the end of it. So
yeah.
um, in that aspect of learning, it's slightly different. It's not academic learning, it's more practical learning. Does
How
that make
how
sense?
quick is the learning? How quick are
Um,
you? Like, are you
again,
learning something new every week?
um, I would say I would try to. I mean, this is aspirational. At the moment, it's very difficult to do.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, but and again, it doesn't have to be hugely difficult. It can just be as simple as like a new method of doing something and something you already know.
hmm.
So something, yeah, something.
So if I were to ask you about your a typical day or yeah, a typical, would you include some learning time within
Yeah.
your typical day? Yeah,
Yeah. So also because the way we work, sometimes the client asks for something quite specific and you want to make sure you're doing
yeah,
um, the best approach to it. So
yeah,
you would do some research to check, is this the best way to do it? You could talk to other team members, maybe some who are more senior,
yeah,
ask for advice. We have the way we code, we always review the work, like the team reviews it
yeah.
before it gets put out to the real world, shipped out. Um, so it's very collaborative, but it's also good to yeah, get ideas from other people and then you also do your own research to see if it's something you could improve upon. Yeah.
There's a comment on chat about somebody mentioned that he liked the idea of practical learning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's hugely important because we have this thing called analysis paralysis. I guess that's maybe common
Okay,
terminology across learning, where if you can spend so long thinking about how to do something and what's the best way, you never actually do it.
right.
In coding, there's lots of different. I think this is one thing that people maybe who are not used to coding every day or not used to like the technical details of what coding involves is that there's so many different ways to do the same thing. There's there's a lot of different ways to add a button, for example, and
Yeah,
how and what's the best way to do that. And there's a lot of debate if you're a coder, and then like, because it's a collaborative thing, it can be, and then so you can spend a lot of time. This is a very simplified example, but it can get much more complex. So you can spend a lot of time researching different ways to do the same thing, and
okay.
then never actually get round to
Yeah,
doing it. Yeah. And then you can think, oh yeah, I know how to do that,
yeah,
but different actually doing it. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, so what can you, how could you advise our audience on practical things
yeah.
they can do to achieve practical learning?
Yeah. So build it. Just start actually writing the code and seeing what you're doing on some visual in a visual way.
Okay,
So like it can even be like just in the console, so like not visual, not a user interface necessarily, but something that you can build and then see, build and then see. And then that's kind of an iterative approach. That's how we work as well. So
okay,
have that, don't spend a long time building, building, building for like a week and then see the result.
yeah,
Build a very simplified view of what you want to do.
okay. And
Let me think of an example because I get this is quite abstract. Say you want to display a calculator on a web page.
okay, yeah,
You could spend a week coding all the logic of the calculator. So all the multiplication, the division, everything.
the
And
function.
then at the end of the week, put it up somewhere and then you have it done. That's like the long way of like not iterating. You spend a long time. Or you could do all I want is 1 plus 1, and then I see 2 on the page.
Okay, yeah,
That's the simplest version of what you can do, but you've got the scaffolding in place that you can build more stuff. So like get to that first view very quickly
yeah.
that you can then iterate on it. Like that's the iterative approach, and it kind of helps you learning faster because you're doing more.
More of the same,
Yeah.
you're getting better at it.
Yeah. Because you could end up getting stuck at the point where you don't know how to put it onto a web page and then you never finish.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that's, yeah.
Are you able to do this process independently?
Yeah, I'd say so.
You're coding and you're reviewing your code.
Yes.
There are
Yeah.
methods of doing this as
Yeah,
a
you don't, I mean, technically you don't need anyone to review anything if you're just building it as a hobby.
okay,
You can just do it yourself, but if you have friends who are interested, if you have a community or like online, there's a lot of open source events or open source repositories and
where you
things.
would be able to submit your
Yeah.
code and people have a look at it. Okay.
Yeah, one thing that's quite nice that maybe you need a little bit of technical knowledge is something called 24 pull requests. I think it's something that happens in December. Oh, let me see the website if I can find it. 24 pull requests. And that's kind of like this open source thing where you can contribute a little bit to existing code. It's
Uh,
very like
okay.
entry level. Yeah, let me share that resource here. You need a little bit of technical knowledge already to know what this platform is. So it might be something later, but um, it's a nice way to collaborate with other people. Yeah.
Where do you go to get, where do you go to learn about all these websites? Like,
A lot of it was through that code bar, code bar.
okay.
Yeah.
So like it was a resource list that you would have access to.
Um, well, they would publicize different events, and this was one of the events that they had where people would come together and
Mhm.
go through these in an office or in a shared space.
Yeah.
But I think if you look up at meetup.com, there's going to be a lot of events wherever you are. And the hard part is like finding a good one of like, some where you want to go and people are nice. But if you just go to a few and see, or you could create your own community as well. I think that's underestimated that that's quite a good thing to do. If you already are in an area and you know there's a demand for it, you could always create your own meetup and go through these things or tutorials together.
Right.
And that's pretty good.
Have you had success on LinkedIn?
I haven't used LinkedIn that much,
Okay.
but I think yeah, there is code. All that stuff is on LinkedIn as well. I haven't really seen the events on LinkedIn. I use it more for like reading or consuming material than events. I don't even know if they have events, but
I
I
think they
imagine
do.
they do. Yeah.
They do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's possible, and you can link all these things together. I think as well, like meetups. I'm sure there's a way to publicize the meetup on LinkedIn. But I haven't used it that much.
I have an interesting question from Hiba on the chat. She's asking if your history background has influenced your approach to problem solving in coding, and if so, how?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess what this is very high level, but history kind of lets you see the reason for why things are the way they are.
Okay.
Doesn't excuse anything. It doesn't mean um, you know all the answers or anything, but it kind of gives you a reason. Oh, this is why this is like this. Like there's a link.
It's the way you're thinking about it.
Yeah, the way you're thinking about it. And in coding, you also see that it's like, oh, somebody thought this. That's why we've ended up here. And it kind of it makes you feel less, I don't know, angry, or I don't know what the right word is. It makes you feel like, okay, there's a reason people do things, and then you can kind of move on, like go ahead with it. And,
Hmm.
it helps you understand the thinking of why people made those decisions. And then you can empathize with them a bit more or talk to them a bit more about it. And yeah, so somebody might have written some code last year, and sometimes it can be frustrating, but then if you talk to them about it and understand why they did it, yeah, it kind of is interesting link. I don't know, practically day to day, it kind of yeah, helps you move on and kind of talk to people.
Yeah.
So that's been
Love that.
interesting. Yeah.
We're actually getting a few more questions on chat, so let me try to get through those and then we can continue. But so we're getting a question from Michelle. She says, after all the skills you've gained while studying in tech, how did you manage to break that ceiling and finally land your first role in tech?
So I was very persistent, like very at the beginning when I was at that hedge fund. I think the company that I wanted the apprenticeship with said they weren't hiring, and they said they weren't hiring at that time.
Okay, which
And
we
so
we
I
hear
said, when?
so often.
Yeah.
We're
So then
not
I said, when
having-
will you be? Yeah. So I said, when? And then I messaged at that time again, like a month or so, being like, oh, has that changed? And I know genuinely they wanted to help, but if I had kind of forgotten about it, it could have been the case that the person I was talking to wouldn't have pushed for it either.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, I think again, just talking to people who have already done it and finding a role somewhere where you can learn and you know that somebody wants you to learn is half the battle. But yeah, just kind of being very persistent and deciding, I'm going to do this. Either you're going to be in my way or you're going to help me.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love that, by the way, and I think so oftentimes you hear that it was persistence, right? It was
Yeah.
I didn't make it the first time, or the first time I asked, I didn't get the right answer that I wanted, but I didn't just stop. I just
Yeah.
kept going.
Yeah. So it's actually interesting is when I was at the hedge fund, I gave my manager my resignation and they told me I was making a mistake. They said their wife was a software developer and they don't enjoy it that much. And I could make a lot more money if I stayed in the hedge fund. Probably true. But I also did not enjoy it at all. And I thought, no, I know I want to do this. And they were dissuading me from doing it, but I just knew I wanted to do it. And so again, with that, I decided that a while ago. So that helped me just like be sure
Yeah,
that it doesn't matter. And even if he was right, how would I know until I did it?
right.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
I'm glad I did it. Yeah.
So would you say, did you feel like you were taking a risk doing this?
Um, Interesting. I don't know if I gave my at that time I was so sure I wanted to do it. It wasn't till after when I was actually doing it that I was thinking this is a bit of a risk, but again, I just kind of
It was
pushed
just
those thoughts to the side. I was like, it is a risk, but everything worth doing is a bit of a risk ultimately. So,
love that.
yeah.
We have a question in the audience about somebody was asking, Muhammad was asking about the biggest challenge you faced while shifting careers into software engineering.
I guess it's that there's like those low level technical concepts when people discuss, sometimes you can feel out of your depth. But again, it depends on the type of code that you're writing. So I think if you're doing something like highly technical, maybe, I don't know, aeronautical engineering or some scientific research, that's when you need those like really in-depth technical skills. But then the rest of it is like if you're working for e-commerce or something where you're building a website, there's not as you'll get to a point when you come to a system where you start needing to know that, but you can learn that at that time, or you
Right.
could learn towards that. There's a long way before you get to that point in a lot of industries. Um, and so that was a challenge at some point, but with the continuous learning, you kind of figure out that you will be able to learn that, and
Yeah.
when, like, the point at which you need to learn just before you actually have to do it. And yeah, I think also it's okay to say, I don't know. That's one
Okay.
thing, you
Yeah.
know. I think you see it in technical roles a lot. People, because there's no structure of being like, this person knows this, no certification really shows what you know.
Yeah.
Um, it's better to say you don't know than pretend you do and do something bad, like it can have big ramifications.
I want to ask you about certifications, actually.
Yes,
Right?
sure.
I'm gonna ask a question from the audience, and I think maybe certifications could be, we'll get into certification through that. It's somebody is saying that basically he has a friend that went through a very similar experience to you, where he was a humanities major, took some courses, but hasn't been able to get that job.
Hmm.
He's been told according to the chat that it's because he doesn't have a computer science background.
Okay.
How would you, I mean, do you have advice to give somebody like that? How
Yeah,
they could move forward?
forward. I guess there are some companies that we work with as well who have said stuff like that before.
Okay.
Um, and what's happened, I guess it's harder at the entry, like when you're trying to talk to that company straight away, because we at our company we have some people who have and some people who haven't.
Okay.
So it's a mix. And
Perfect.
actually, I think that's the ideal mix. You want, maybe it's not, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do a computer science degree at all. It's actually really good, but it's good to have a mix of people who have done that and then a mix of people who haven't, I'd say. And I guess the way to overcome it is maybe get some of those fundamental concepts. Like there are some that are useful
Of
to
course.
know computer science concepts as a developer. You can learn those. There's a lot, again, resources online. If you look up, there'll be like hundreds, because a lot of software developers feel this way. So there'll be like hundreds of resources about learning those fundamentals that you can communicate them. And you can say to somebody who says you haven't got a degree, you can tell them I've done this study and I can talk to somebody about it and show that I do know the fundamentals. Yeah, and I think that maybe would be helpful but again, if it's like online and it's like immediate shifting through, then it's harder to do that. But if it's somebody you can talk to, it's like if you're already at the interview level, for example, then
Mhm.
slightly different. But then, yeah, there'll be other companies where that's not strictly necessary. They might be smaller companies, but yeah.
Certifications. I mean, because you can, certifications must help, right? I mean, it's kind
Yeah,
of
I think
degree,
they help, yeah,
something,
I think they help get your foot in the door.
right? Yeah.
And they there's a huge range of certifications out there. Some are better than others. There's like, I know there's some of the AWS, Amazon ones that some of my colleagues have done. And I think half of the thing is they give you a framework and like keep you accountable to that learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but then there's other ones that you can't really build anything at the end of. So they're maybe too theoretical or like,
Right.
not
So
useful.
back to the concept of when you're learning it, you need to be able to build it as well.
Yeah, yeah. I
Right.
think that's
Right.
important. Yeah.
So software is changing all the time, right? There's a lot happening in software. If I was making that shift into software engineering now,
Mhm.
what new technologies or are you seeing developing, and what new skill sets are you see coming up that you would suggest people focus on?
Yeah. Well, right now, I think people know it's not just software, but out like AI is like a big hyped thing.
Yeah.
Um, it feels like people don't really know how to use it yet, though. There's a lot of talk about it, but the
Yeah.
practical application above and above like what OpenAI and ChatGPT is doing,
Yeah.
apart from that use case,
Yeah.
and then some assistive technology like helping people do little tasks,
Yeah.
it's not super clear how it would help um,
Mm.
as much. This is generative AI. So I think there's like traditional machine learning, which
Yes.
is like this data means this.
Yes.
Uh, that is an interesting area, and it feels like that will be a growing area. And it's not directly related to software engineering. It's like they're kind of on the Venn diagram. There's like a little overlap in the middle.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's like a huge discussion area, and I think it's something to read about and know about and see where your interest takes you as well with that, because I think that's there's a lot of talk and money involved in that at the moment, and
Mm.
it feels like that's the direction people are trying to pull in, but they don't know exactly how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it takes off and somebody finds that, that's going to be like a huge thing. Yeah.
So that's on the more technical side. How about not on the non-technical side?
What to learn, you mean?
Learning skill sets that I need to focus on to that are more useful today in the tech world than or that are more demanded, I guess, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately you're looking for.
I think that communication, I know everyone says communication, so I also used to not like hearing when everyone was like, just, it's so important. But actually, with more experience, it's not just communication for the sake of communication. It's like understanding how somebody's thinking and what they understand of what you're saying, because there's so much context and so much that gets miscommunicated. Just being
Yeah,
like very clear in
right.
your messaging. Try to be as clear as possible and yeah, communicate just what you need to, no more, no less. That is very, very difficult. I think that's almost a moving target all the time. But
Okay.
I think that is the one because that will help you in whatever career you have, I think. And in the technical world, it's even more important just because it can be so low level detail that, you don't need to communicate that to everyone. Um, yeah.
I got a question on the chat of somebody asking about what it takes to move on from I guess, a junior or a software engineer to a senior software engineer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I just talked to my colleague about this as well because they're more junior. And a lot of it is it's experience, but it's also once you have that experience, you'll see like the fundamentals of software are not that different. There's like definitely there's a limit to what is involved when you're building software, and the
Okay.
more time you spend in it, you might have built a website using a certain language, for example, but once you know one or two languages,
Mhm.
the other languages are all the same, kind of like that you understand the fundamentals of what you need
Yeah.
from those languages.
Okay.
And so the more experience you have, you're like, oh, I've seen this relates to this. That we're
Right.
using another word for this tool, but this tool does the same thing as this other tool. And
Uh-huh.
then you know how to find out what you need from the different tool that you already know from the one you do know. So like what you need to learn is clearer, or what you need to just refresh upon is clearer.
Hmm.
So it's just building that framework of knowledge that you have like a little library, I guess, of knowledge that you can just pick up on. And I think once you have a decent level of that, that's the difference between a junior will know maybe one range of languages or like one set, or a senior will know a few, two.
Multiple. Okay. Yeah.
I'd
Oh,
say
that's
that's
interesting. I've actually never heard that referred to in this way. I think that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, yeah. I reckon it's that.
Cool. I like that. I might, I got a bunch of other questions coming on chat. Another question, I asked you this earlier. You said all of it, but maybe re-ask it because,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just, no, it's about the, where do I start first? Do I start first on front end development, back end development, and the approach? Is
Yeah.
is there a right answer to this?
Not really. So the
Yeah,
way my mentor taught me was through more back-end code. But if I was advising now, I would say front end. I think that was just their preference at that time. It was fine because they knew how to teach me at a very low level.
yeah,
And I trusted they knew what they were teaching me. But I quite now I've got more senior, I quite like visual and front end feedback. And I think it's just a bit more exciting generally, just probably my preference as well.
okay.
But being able to see something visually and being able to show your friends who maybe aren't technical is way more fun.
Yeah, yeah,
Just showing
absolutely.
them like the black screen with like, white or green writing. It's not as, it's not as engaging maybe, but that's not strictly means you have to do it that way. But yeah, it's nice to see something visual.
You're making a good argument for it, honestly, right?
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
something that you can really, you see it like right
Yeah.
away. Like,
Yeah. I've built this is the thing about coding is sometimes you can spend weeks doing something that's not visible,
right.
and then you show people and they don't care. But then you can make a button that takes literally a line and people are very excited about it. So the
Yeah.
visual aspect is just who we are, I guess, that people like the visual stuff. And even I now, it's fun to, it's moved on a lot. Like front end code can be really technical and quite challenging and it's got more complex. But it is also fun to be able to see stuff visually. So I guess I would say that, but yeah, there's no right answer to what you.
We're approaching the end of our discussion, and I'm trying. I would love to give some, I guess, advice. So I'm going to ask two last questions. I want you to tell us, in your experience, are there certain habits or characteristics that
Mhm.
in your career path have been useful that you would like to highlight to others?
Characteristics of myself or
Yourself, yes.
of
Like
myself.
that yourself or others around you that you've seen succeed in technical careers.
Oh, yeah. I think that clarity, I've seen people get to more senior positions. This is, I think, because they understand something. Once you know something quite well, you can communicate it clearly.
Yeah.
So being able to do that has been very helpful because clients like this or people you're working with at a business level like this, and it's a skill that not everyone has. Um, but yeah, communicating clearly and distilling information down. So even helping with deciding what needs to be done next,
Yeah.
why, and having some logic applied to it. That's been very useful and makes people very happy, to be
Yes.
able to have that clarity. Um, Being collaborative has been really
Okay.
good. Always going to work in a team
Yeah.
whatever work you do. So you need to be good at it. Need to approach stuff with that mindset rather than ego. And, I've worked with people like that too, who kind
Okay.
of maybe want to show what you can do at the expense of others, but ultimately you're a team, and that has a time frame in which you can do that.
Right.
Um, yeah, so working collaboratively and again, the communication comes into that because you will be working with people who are more senior to you
Mhm.
and more junior to you. So you need to be able to communicate both ways. say
Yeah.
when you don't know something and ask what you don't know,
Yeah.
and then be able to communicate it to somebody who doesn't know those concepts as well, so clearly enough.
Right.
Yeah, so collaboration and yeah, that communication clearly, I think, is probably the most useful. Yeah.
Okay. And then I think finally, what I would love if you could give us two actions that
Yeah.
our audience can take today after this session
Yeah.
to further their journey into a technical role.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah. It reminds me of when I was studying. That's why it's quite nice to think about that because it's very exciting at that point because you can do anything. Like you really can apply this to anything you're interested in. So I'd say find something you're actually interested in. So not maybe just something you find online, but something you've always thought about or wondered about, or, are interested in solving something. It could be something very small and simple for your friends, or something, environmental level.
Yeah.
Um,
But
and
something
then,
that you feel strongly about.
yeah, because you will find it difficult at some point. So
Yeah.
if you're not that interested in it and it's difficult, you'll just be,
Yeah.
forget it.
Yeah.
Um, and then find other people maybe who can help you with that. uh,
Okay.
through online communities, and then you'll have some more engagement in
You're
that
not
thing.
alone.
And then build it. So like come up with a very simplified plan of what you eventually want to do,
Yeah.
and just start finding a way to build that, I'd say. Yeah. In whatever language, whatever framework, whatever. Yeah.
I think we can use that as our as a tagline, by the way. Just build it.
Yeah. I
Just
think
build it.
that's a
That
good
start,
one.
right? Just take that first step, just do it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's the biggest learning I had when I was starting is like I sometimes would read something and think, oh yeah, I know, I get it. And then when it came to actually doing it,
Yeah.
it's when you
Yeah.
realize you don't actually
I,
know.
I think I mean, that's really fitting advice that users can take and start today. Just start it today, guys. Like, build it
Yeah,
today. Uh,
something very simple, simple, simple. Like,
Start simple and then grow.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Priya, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a lot of fun. Your story is, I think, aspirational to a lot of people. I really do meet so many people looking to make that transition. So it's fantastic that we were able to host you today and learn about your journey and learn from your experiences.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. It's reinvigorated me to remembering how it all started. Yeah,
Thank you very much for sharing this story with us.
of course. Thank you.
Great rest of your day, and thank you everybody that's joined us today. Take
Alrighty. Bye.